Hello, everybody, and welcome to tonight's Bowl session on the Revengers tragedy with Red Bull Theater. My name is Nathan Winkelstein, and I will be moderating tonight's discussion. I'm the Associate Artistic Director here at this theater company. We are, of course, having this discussion on the Revengers tragedy because we just put on an online reading of it this past Monday, which is still available to be viewed on our Facebook page, on Red Bull Theater's website, and on YouTube until 7 p.m. tomorrow. So if by chance you have not watched it yet, I strongly suggest you do. It's a wonderful read full of wonderful actors with a wonderful director, many of whom we have here tonight. I'm going to be talking through the people who are actually here on the webinar with me. I'm going to be talking through their functionality for just a second, so bear with me, those of you viewing on Facebook. For those of you here, you will see at the bottom of your screen that you have a couple of options. You have a Q&A option and you have a hand raise option. The Q&A option is going to be your primary one to use today. If you have a question for the director, scholar, actors, please type it in there. You can also, inside that, you can also see other questions that are being asked, and you can upvote them if they are a question that is also of interest to you, and that will help me know which questions are best to go to. You will also see a hand raise option. If you want to ask the question yourself, then you can raise your hand, and if I choose your question from the Q&A, I will check to see if your hand is raised, and if so, I'll ask you to unmute, and you'll be able to ask the question yourself. If you do not want to do that, you can still write questions. I will ask them in your stead, and that is just fine. To prove to me that I didn't just say gobbledygook to all of you, could a couple of you, just for fun, raise your hands for free? Doesn't mean that you have to talk. And if anybody has any questions about how this works, please feel free to just type them into Q&A. I will also thank you all for filling out the poll. I just want to share the results so that you see a breakdown of who's with us tonight. You'll see that we primarily have enthusiasts. Very few consider themselves casual theater goers, with a couple of scholars and actors in the room. To begin tonight's conversation, I'm going to be inviting on a scholar and the director for tonight. The scholar is Tanya Pollard. She is a professor at CUNY grad school as well as Brooklyn College, and she is a well-known expert in Shakespeare and all things classical theater. And the director is Jesse Berger, the artistic director of Red Bull Theater. Jesse and Tanya, if you could join me, that would be great. Hey, Jesse.
Hello.
And hi, Tanya.
Hi.
Thank you both for jumping on for tonight's not quite impromptu, but feels that way, Q&A about the Revengers tragedy that we did on Monday. I want to just jump right in because I'm sure the audience is going to have a lot of questions, but I have some questions for you just to give us some context. Tanya, could you tell us a little bit about the background of this play, when it was written, what the themes were of the time, and also I know that there's some controversy / uncertainty around authorship, and I would love if you could comment on that as well.
Absolutely. So the Revengers tragedy was published in 1607, and it was probably written in early 1606. It was the manuscript, when it was first published, all it says was, "As it hath been sundry times acted by the King's Majesty's servants." So we know that it's a play for the King's Men, which is Shakespeare's company. And one of the things that's interesting is at the time, the company affiliation was sort of a more major identifier than the author itself. The fact that this play was affiliated with the King's Men, which was the most prestigious company and was associated with Shakespeare, was the way the play chose to be identified. And there was no known author that was recorded until it was first attributed to Cyril Tourneur in 1656. Since then, there's been a lot of ongoing debate and uncertainty about that attribution, and most scholars now think that it's probably actually Thomas Middleton, and the play was published along with A Trick to Catch the Old One, which is a play by Thomas Middleton. It has a lot in common with a lot of Middleton's plays, including the poisoned corpse or skull. That's a device he also uses in the Second Maiden's Tragedy. The skull as a prop also features in The Witch, which the Red Bull did a few years ago. The fascination with fashion and clothing in the court is very Middletonian, and the cynicism and preoccupation with money, economics, greed, lust, and revenge are themes that Middleton recurred to throughout his career. But one of the things that's really fascinating about the play is it's a revenger's tragedy that comes really after the peak of revenger's tragedy. And as everyone who's watched this wonderful production knows, it's simultaneously serious and a terrific parody. It really echoes, exaggerates, replays, mocks, and has fun with all the major themes of revenge tragedies: skull, lust, the passions of the demanding dead requiring repayment, internecine conflict over succession, who's going to take over power when one person dies. And the play would have been performed on the same stage with the same company and with the same lead actor who had done plays like Hamlet recently. And I think having that same repertory company is significant in that Richard Burbage, the lead actor who would have played Hamlet and would have strode out on the Globe Theatre holding a skull in his hands, is going to appear again in Revenger's Tragedy, probably holding the same skull, probably wearing many of the same clothes, with the same cast around him. So probably the buddy who plays Horatio is also playing Hippolito, his brother here. So the audience that sees the play is going to experiencing a kind of a deja vu, and it's going to take them a while to figure out, where is this version of Hamlet going this time? Where are we? We're starting off from a common shared set of motifs and associations. Where are we going with it? And the play leads us in some winding route so that the humor gets darker, the violence gets more baroque and macabre, and audiences always have those haunting echoes of past actors, past plots, past motifs hovering behind them at every stage in the performance.
That's fascinating, Tanya. I actually think that that's a kind of a lovely prompt actually into asking Jesse. Jesse, obviously we just did this reading, but this reading was built around a production you did long before my time at Red Bull, so I can't speak to it directly. But I believe it was the second production you ever did with Red Bull Theater approximately a decade ago. And it's borderline an adaptation, I would say. And I would love to know just sort of your history of production and which elements you were looking to pull out in this script.
Sure. Thank you, Nathan, and thank you, Tanya. It's so great to hear you talk about the play and think about it anew. As Nathan, like you said, it was 15 years ago when we did this production for Red Bull. And I really hadn't looked at the script since we closed that production in January of 2006. But I did have a long history of it. Even before we did it at Red Bull in 2005, we did it. The Revenger's Tragedy was really the first Jacobean play other than Shakespeare's plays that I was introduced to. And I was hired to direct a production of it at Washington Shakespeare Company in 1999. So it goes back that far for me. And I remember reading it and falling in love with it. And in some ways it was really formative for me in terms of, it was my real introduction to all the plays. And so when Tanya was talking about those echoes and the motifs that are in the ways in which it echoes with Shakespeare's plays and all the other plays that I didn't know at that time, helped me fall in love with Jacobean's period. But there were things about the play, even from that very first production that I did, where I wanted to clarify the plot, which can be quite confusing with, however many characters there are. I think we had 18 actors in our production and 18 actors in this reading. But it's a quite confusing plot to encounter for the first time as a contemporary audience. So my first thing with approaching the text was about clarity. And then as I got further into it, I began to want there to be more for Antonio and Pietro's storyline in particular. They're very sparsely written in the original, and I wanted to flesh their world out a little bit more. The character of Lucretia, if I remember right, and Tanya, you can correct me if I remember right, in the original, she's only spoken about. She makes no appearance whatsoever. And so I wanted her plot, which is such a crucial plot component of the play, to really be clear. And so that led to the creation of that prologue, dance, mask / orgy that begins our production, and also led to seeing her suicide on screen or on stage, as it were, as we all hope to be back. And then one other major piece, which was Castiza. And the more I worked on the play, the more I felt that it wasn't, I don't know what the right word is, but I felt like Vindice's actions at home should have more consequences. It didn't ring true to me that Castiza would just come in, test her mom, and then really be chased. She was just teasing, just testing your mom. And so I pushed that forward, and I forced Castiza to, Vindice's actions to have real consequences at home, even though he never knows about it. What he did actually damaged his family more deeply than in the original, in my adaptation.
Well, I don't know if you're poaching on the questions or not, Jesse, but you just did a wonderful job of actually addressing 2 of the 3 questions so far, which have actually been about the female characters that you fleshed out that did not exist or, well, were not seen on stage or had a slightly different arc than original. Tanya, if you have any follow-up to that, please do jump in. Otherwise, I will introduce the actors, or I will do so in just a couple minutes.
Oh, go ahead.
Great. Well, wonderful. Well, let's bring on, they've been patiently waiting in the Zoom wings. Let's bring on the crew. We have a whole bunch of the actors from the cast with us today for Q&A. We have the wonderful Anthony Michael Martinez. We have Jason C. Brown, Matthew Rauch, Naomi Peters, Paul Niebanck, and Petronia Paley joining us today. If you guys could all turn your videos and microphones on and join the party.
Hi, everybody.
It's nice seeing you all in your homes as opposed to in front of a red splattered background. Thank you all so much for joining us. I do think, just because I'm looking at the questions right now, and as I mentioned with Jesse, there's actually, of the questions so far, multiple ones asking about the addition of the wife of Antonio's character, and then also the sexual interactions in the play, and so on and so forth. And of course, we have the actress who played Castiza here. And I was wondering, Naomi, if you could talk about how you found playing this character and whether or not you had any knowledge of how the character was sort of designed originally, and then what Jesse did with it, or anything of that nature.
Sure. Well, 15 years ago, we had a lot of conversation around this. So I definitely pulled from the memory banks when we were, remounting the reading and all that. I think my biggest challenge with Castiza is that, yes, the changes, but the massive journey from one end of the pendulum to the other all happens off stage. So there has to be a sense of bringing the audience along. There has to be a sense of willing suspension of disbelief, I think, that you don't get to see her wrestle with the layers of chaste to very unchaste. And so where is it in my thought process, in my, belief about the character off stage that says, yeah, these repercussions have really affected me to the point where I am all in on swinging the pendulum to the other end. That's a challenge. And, it is definitely a subjective point of view from the audience about whether or not or how it works, and how people believe it. But yeah, I think that's the conversation. I understood the goal. I understood that the end result was going for these repercussions. And it was, what can I do to potentially carry thought process from off stage to on stage? And whether or not that was successful is up to anybody viewing.
Thank you.
Can I chime in on that for a moment, Nathan?
Please, Tanya.
So I want to say, I think that's wonderful because Castiza is a kind of a cartoon. Her name means chastity, and this is a play with many cartoon-like figures who are very flat. When you have characters named Ambicioso, Lucerioso, Super Vacuo, Castiza, we're playing with these sort of exaggerated, stereotypical characters. And for Middleton, the female characters in particular tend to be boxed into either being the fallen or the idealized, flattened figures of perfection. And Castiza is really, in many ways, a very dull character as written, because all she has to do is sit and be perfect. And I think the way that that Naomi reinterprets her and that Jesse rewrites her gives her a chance to actually play with Middleton's cartoons and to say, we're not stuck with these cartoons. We can actually rethink what these characters can and should be doing. I think that's really in the collaborative spirit of the play's riffs and revisions on its past models.
So there is another question that leads perfectly into, but first I want to acknowledge all of the mistakes the tech wizard is making behind the scene. First of all, Jacqueline and Joshua, thank you both for asking the question about the women, and I should have checked to see if you had a hand raised. I apologize for that. Also, because I didn't realize I should scroll in my panelists things. There are two actors I didn't introduce, Russell, who has joined us. Thank you, Russell. And also Petronia, who I'm hoping is still here, who have the bad luck of having last names that begin with P and S. So we're low on the thing. So if they can join, we also have them with us. The question that made me wonder about, let me double check this time to be sure. Okay, Susan does not have her hand raised, so I will ask this question for Susan Saltrick. And this might be for you, Tanya, though if anybody else has this information, it would be good. Is there a tradition in Jacobean theater of improvisation?
Certainly the clown, and historically the operating assumptions are that the clown has that license and other characters don't. And we know that historically Shakespeare and his original clown had a lot of tensions and conflicts over the locus of control. It's threatening to the playwright for the clown to be able to run away with his script, sometimes be maybe enjoyed, admired, and applauded, perhaps even more than the playwright's original lines. Nothing can be worse than that. The operative assumptions are that in the classical theater, outside of the clown, there's not that much improvisation, but to be honest, we really don't know. And I think as scholars of the sort of oral past, we have to all admit to a lot of humility about the limits of our knowledge. We don't know what's exactly spoken on stage, and we do know that the plays are printed in different editions with different forms and different words, so it's entirely plausible that there's a certain amount of flux, and whether that initiates from the actors or the playwright, I don't think we can be certain.
Can I open that up just to see if any of the other cast members have had the good luck, misfortune, I'm not sure, of playing one of the Shakespearean or Jacobean clowns, and whether it was ever in a form where you did feel like you could freeform more than you might with verse? Has anyone had that? I know most of you are strapping leading men and leading women, so maybe not, but I was just curious if any of you have had any experience improvising today in the Jacobean or classical canons.
No, but I've been in a production where the clown has gone off the rails a little bit, and it was actually really, really fun and funny. And as Tanya said, hi Tanya, it's nice to see you. There seems to be a tradition of clowns deviating from the textual, what we have on the page from 500 years ago. And in those productions, I won't name the actor or the theater because I don't want to out anybody, but when that happened, it was hilariously funny, both for the audience and for the cast. And so there was a kind of meta moment of sort of shared joy and laughter within the context of the play that felt very correct in terms of what was happening on stage. So I don't know if that's a useful answer, but
I thought so. but I'm not the end all be all of such things.
Yeah.
We have another question that actually two different people have asked, and again, not two who have raised their hands. I do just want to point out to the people who are watching, a couple of you have raised your hands but not typed in questions. If you could type in the questions so I could see them, that would be great. But for now, we actually have two that are quite similar, which are actually asking about the challenges and opportunities of, well, let me just quote them because they write it so very well, of exploring/exploiting the Zoom space in performance. Were there opportunities for meta Zoom elements, etc.? And another person also asks about the challenge. This question is coming from both Joshua Reed and Elisa Carlson. Jason, could you take the first swing at that one?
Sure. Well, I was actually sitting throughout in my space because that's what best allowed me to be seen in my space. And so I found the actual playing space to be quite compact and small, but, and I tend to be an actor who makes kind of big, grandiose movements and gestures. So, it was a little bit challenging for me at first, but once you kind of get used to those being the parameters in which you have to play, there's a lot of freedom in that. Also like in the death, it was a lot simpler, and then having, me dying actually on my computer keyboard with my eye just being shown at the end, I thought was, you can play with a lot of really good visual things there with just thinking in a much smaller space, actually. So I found that kind of challenging and fun.
Thanks. I do know some of you, I might actually toss this one to Matt because Matt got such a wonderful experience here of, I think we sent Matt 25 props?
22. It was 22 props. Yeah.
So I wonder if you could actually
and a green screen. 22 props and a green screen.
So I wonder if we could actually pull back the curtain, or the green screen, I guess, even a little further, and talk about just the what we're not seeing happening for you guys when you're all Zooming, especially in a Red Bull production.
Well, it's an interesting question. Jesse, as many of you know, is a bit of a maximalist, and so there's not, and particularly with this play, which is not a very subtle play, and I mean, there's great nuance in the play, and there's a great history to the play. And Tanya, I just want to say I was really interested to hear you talk about Burbage and the tradition of Hamlet and the company that would have performed these other plays that were performing this play, and there are many references in this play to plays that preceded it. And that's a whole other conversation. And I'm fascinated by Burbage and his history with Shakespeare and all these other writers. And the Zoom experience for me in theater is a challenging one, because I personally feel like it exists in this sort of netherworld between live performance and filmed performance, which a film performance is a live performance. You're in a room with a number of people and creating a sort of a chemical experience. The challenge of Zoom for me personally is that it's a solitary one, and you're seeing yourself. There's really no way to do it without looking at yourself, because you need to be aware of where you are, and particularly with the maximalist stuff that we were doing, you have to reach into the camera and take a prop and do a little bit of sleight of hand. And yes, I had many boxes from Amazon sent to me by Red Bull Theater, a sword and a skull and costumes from Clint and all these things. And the challenge of that is that when you're in a production, a sort of real production, there's a huge amount of people who are around to help the production happen. It's not just the actors on stage and the director. I know this sounds very basic, but the elimination of any kind of crew, of stage managers, of props people, of wardrobe assistants, of the people who actually make the bones of the play happen every night, is both disorienting and creates an immense workload that is sort of beyond actually sort of dropping into the play and performing the play. And I found that in a role like Vindice, which is a large role that demands lots of different elements of performative technique, I found it to be, frankly, very distracting. I was very open with Jesse about this. And it's a medium that I find very challenging. It's interesting for me to hear Jason say that he was sitting down, because I personally would find that constraining. But now that I'm thinking about it, I think the next time I do a Zoom reading, I want to try it sitting down, because I think it might limit, in a really good way, like in a way that sort of film and television does, it might limit the choices that you're able to make. And I also just standing up like that for, hours and hours was a long evening. But I recognize that this is a new way of communication. I'm really curious to see where this goes, and whether this, I guess, new version of theater, whatever it is and whatever it's turning into, will continue when, God help us, all of this is over and we're past this terrible moment in history. I do wonder if this art form will continue, if it will be sort of taken over again by live performance and film performance, or if this space will exist continuing as a sort of a different way of telling stories. And I'd be curious to see where that goes, and interested in being a part of it, just to learn new things and new techniques. That's
Jesse,
a long answer. Sorry.
No, it's great. We have our talk. Jesse, could you chat about it from the other side, from the perspective, because of course directing these things is a whole new forum as well.
Whole new format. I mean, we're all in the Wild West, really. Like, none of us know what we're doing. The first time I heard the word Zoom was 6 months ago, and we've done, Nathan, you can tell me, like 5 or 6 online readings since then. I think we started in May, I think was the first one, or April, when we did Tis Pity She's a Whore, somewhere in there. And every one of them has been slightly different. And some of that was, at the beginning, we just were going, well, we don't know what we're doing. How do we just get the right number of actors online at the same time to read a play? And how do we navigate even the union rules around that? And the union didn't even know what the rules were. So everybody's we're all making up as we go along. But when we had the opportunity to do Revenger's Tragedy, which some of you will know, we were planning to do on June 1st, and we decided to pause that out of respect for Black Lives Matter and George Floyd. And so we had a reading that was all prepared to go in a kind of less maximalist version, even though in the context of that time in June, it was pretty maximal, right, Nathan? We were pushing the envelope further. So with each one of these online readings, we've just been trying new things. And when we decided we would do Revenger's Tragedy again this fall as kind of our kickoff for the season, I really felt like, if the actors were willing, and and this required a lot of willingness, as you heard from Matt, on all of these actors' parts to really participate, that Revenger's Tragedy as a play just demanded a theatricality and I'm going to use Matt's word, maximalist approach, that some of the other things that we had done and some of the things we're playing this fall don't. And so for me, it's about being responsive to the play itself. And because of the way this original production was conceived, it was so theatrical. And we had Daniel Levy's original music pushing us forward, and you could hear, so for me, it was about answering what the demands of the play are. And, you see me in front of this black green screen now, and I think, well, we're probably going to do most of our online readings in a more contained way going forward. But I don't know, we're just making it up as we go along and trying to serve the needs of the play in this new medium as best we can.
I do have to say that's very Red Bull, because when we first did this play 15 years ago, we had an incredibly brief rehearsal process. The play is the scholars who are watching this will know that this is a notoriously difficult play. It's very rarely performed. And we were sort of aware that we were sort of David versus Goliath with this play. And, we put this play up in 2.5 weeks. We had no idea what we had before the first audience showed up. I remember distinctly the invited dress rehearsal, which was full. And we got to the curtain call, and Mark Vitor said to me just before the curtain call, we had no idea if they were actually even going to clap. Yeah. We really had no idea what we had.
And then the curtain fell down.
And then the curtain fell down. That's right. But so that actually feels sort of similar to what we did on Monday, that we just sort of tossed ourselves into it and said, let's see what shakes out,
Tanya, did you have?
But I think there's something very Jacobean about this, because the Revenger's Tragedy was written in 1606, and that was a year that the theater was shut for 7 months because of plague. And I want to suggest that this is a play forged in the crucible of plague, and that the kind of strange and edgy and dark and cynical revisions of a theatrical tradition that Middleton is doing in this play, he's doing them in the wake of plague and in the midst of plague. And the theater that we know as the Jacobean theater is really a kind of response to the insanity of an ongoing pandemic. And I guess I want to say that to say that I think there, obviously there's a lot of questions right now that people are brainstorming about right here about what happens to the theater in the time of plague. And I want to believe that it can be a kind of moment of some radical experimentation and change. And it did not die in 1606. Obviously, this is just when it's really exploding, if anything. And I'm going to be curious. And I think that the way you all responded to some of the restrictions and possibilities of the new genre and the new medium of Zoom was really exciting. We have the mock red curtains, and that's very Middletonian. I think the kind of revamping and exaggerating and cartooning it up. But then you have these wonderful swoops between boxes with the gestures and the skull becoming kind of transferred back and forth between the boxes. And I think there's something fabulously Jacobean about that willingness to play with the remnants, play with the ashes of what we've had and make something new out of it. So I'm excited to see what you're all going to be doing next and what other people are going to be doing next, because I think it's a moment that theater can respond to.
Well, that's a tough one to follow up, but I know I saw both Paul and Naomi wanted to jump in. So could Naomi go ahead and then maybe Paul?
Yeah, I just wanted to dovetail on this talk about challenges with Zoom, because co-sign everything that everyone has said about the challenges and limitations. But with the original cast and our lovely new additions geographically dispersed all over the place, this reunion could never have happened without this technological environment. And for one, this has been revisiting a world and a group of people that I have been very grateful to say hello to again. So that might be a bit of a selfish thing, but I also think that the possibilities that are introduced in terms of examining different perspectives from different regions, different stories, and what they bring to the collective storytelling, which is what we're all here for. I find that very exciting. I'm curious. There are a lot of challenges to be explored, a lot of kinks to work out, but I, for one, am leaning into the curiosity of that.
Thanks, Naomi. Paul?
Actually, I was just scrolling through the questions, and maybe Jesse, you should answer one of the questions. I was just speaking of meta. First of all, I will say, Tanya, your words, hopefully they will happen next year and we will open up and flourish in a whole new way. And I had one of my most challenging acting moments was in our final rehearsal when I was doing the end speech. My 3.5-year-old daughter crawled in the door and crawled up on the bed over here and was watching me act for the first time. And I felt like, holy shit, I'm totally naked. I don't have any of my fellow actors around me. And she's looking at me like, what are you doing? In a medium, she already understands because she's 3.5 years old and she's already had Zoom classes. And so that was a very strange experience. But then let's shift for a second. Jesse, I just read one of the questions is about the corruption. Is it okay to corrupt Antonio in the end? And I didn't realize that was perhaps I don't remember 15 years ago because I'm older now, but that you talked about that wasn't in the original.
It wasn't.
So you want to talk about that? Yeah,
thanks for asking. I love all of you, and I thought your performance was great. I hope Grace liked it too. she's named after a character in this play, Graciana.
Yes.
You know, Antonio's character developed in rehearsals, Paul. I don't remember everything along the way, but I remember distinctly writing some lines with you in the rehearsal room.
Yes.
We created, and we collaborated on them. We created his kind of Angelo moment of having lust within him that was bottled up. And so there's a little speech in there. I can't remember. It's in Act 2, Scene 3, right after that. Well, that whole scene with Pietro is an invention that's largely cobbled together from Francis Bacon and others that I don't remember everyone I was stealing from, to try to inject some of Antonio and Pietro into the second half of our play, because otherwise they would only appear in Act 1, Scene 4, and you never see Antonio again until I believe in the original, Tanya, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure you never see him again, except maybe at the coronation, until the very last scene when he takes over. So I really wanted Antonio and Pietro to be characters in our second act, so that the audience could be reminded of that storyline. And then we discovered that about his kind of inner corruption. And I can't remember which came first, the chicken or the egg. It was partially because I'd made that choice about Castiza, and I wanted to see where that led in the play. And so they seemed to dovetail together at the end. And that's why we saw them just visually at the end, after that speech at the end of the play. And I do remember this back in the 90s, when I first started working on the play in the late 90s. One of the things that was on my mind was about the kind of hypocrisy in government and corruption all around. And it was around the election of George W. Bush, and he was using a catchphrase of "restore honor and integrity to the White House," and it was that oblique reference to Monica Lewinsky and all of that was all just coded language. And so to me, Antonio was kind of John Ashcroft, and he was John Ashcroft in my mind at that time. And so that, I don't know about anything about John Ashcroft's personal life, but that there was a hypocrisy underneath the super clean veneer, and that the new Puritan that Antonio really represented to me in the play had a kind of corruption underneath it. It was just going to be much more bottled up than the really overt corruption of the Duke and the Surioso and that crew. And so here comes this ultra strict, ultra puritanical guy. I didn't buy that he could, just like I didn't buy, well, I guess you're just hearing I didn't trust in the claims of total purity of these characters. And I thought modern audiences wouldn't either. And so to see that there's a different kind of menace in his puritanical point of view in government was important to me.
So, Jesse, there's actually a question that follows right along with that question that Paul stole. I have one job, Paul. One job. That's not true. I have like 38. By the way, that question was from Mary and Harry Kaplan that Paul stole from me. And this next question is from Evelyn. I apologize if I mess up your last name. From Evelyn Gildry Voiles. And she's actually asking Jesse what motivated the timing of this read now, and whether the current zeitgeist has anything to do with it.
Well, yes and no. I mean, we, as I said earlier, we had planned to do this reading in June as a kind of, in March or April, when we sort of figured out, we're going to be doing online readings. When we decided we were going to do some reunion readings of past favorite productions of ours, and Revenger's Tragedy was high up on that list. And so at first, the decision to do it was really just, this is a great play that we haven't done for 15 years. This is an opportunity to re-explore it and share it with audiences. And then as it got postponed for good reasons, and we started looking at this time period, I began to feel it was even more relevant in terms of its attack on corruption and government hypocrisy and abuse of power and the desire for vigilante justice, which is probably not the way to go. So those things all felt really pertinent to me, but I can't say that we didn't choose it with that in mind. But as the time converged on it, and Matt and I had some conversations about it, well, maybe this is too close to the bone even now, we decided to press forward. And I felt even more strongly as we got closer that this was a play that could really speak to our current moment, however allegorically and hopefully revealingly and hopefully in a positive way.
I have to just jump in and say I really agree with that. I had some real reservations about the play now. The play is a very, very violent, disturbing play in a lot of ways. It's a very corrupt play. In some ways, it unintentionally sort of glorifies a kind of corrupt, louche society that I felt was a little close to the bone, and I'll be honest about that. And I was really thrilled with how the play sort of now spoke to me and my personal reactions to what's happening in the world, sort of emotionally and politically. It was enlightening, and I thank you, Jesse, for pushing me down that path. And I thank the play and Webster and Turner and Shakespeare and all the people who were in there for turning, as usual, a very bright light on things that happened today from many centuries ago. There was a question. I was also scrolling through the questions, and I saw an interesting thing that was, sorry, Nate, you only have one job, but you're not going to do it right now. There was a question about new choices and old choices, and I do want to answer that, but I'm actually curious, Anthony, what your experience was coming to the play. I know, don't be surprised. Was coming to the play freshly, because coming to the play 15 years later, which is a really long time to let something sit in your brain and then re-explore themes and text and characters you played as a much younger person. I'm curious what it was like for you to sort of jump in now and experience this play, freshly. I'm going to assume that you have not performed the Revengers tragedy before.
Well, I have not, but I've read it before. A blast. I mean, in the context of also just learning to interplay on Zoom with other actors, and then to have with Sordo this extravagant kind of, I don't know, Richard II sycophantic, flattering kind of role.
Yeah.
It's a learning opportunity, and also again, a show that I feel is a special interpretation of how we understand what's going on right now with all the characters and the relationship to the world today. I don't really have a reference point except for the pictures, but it was very scary, and that it was very fast, but it was super, super fun. And it's incredible to be on the shoulders of someone like you. And this
That's kind of you, thank you.
Grateful.
Thank you. That's a nice thing to say.
Great. Well,
sorry,
I guess
Nathan.
I'll ask
I
the question.
apologize for
That's
jumping
great.
in.
Yeah. No, it's great. Let's just make a running joke out of making Nathan. No, it's fine.
That sounds good.
So, Paul K. Smith has a question actually about kind of one of the grandest moments in the play, which is I believe originally Act 3-5, but he actually, I believe, has his hand raised. So he'll be our first attempt at that. So Paul, I'm going to ask you to unmute in just a second, and you'll be able to ask your question.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
The reason I asked the question, first of all, very briefly, is last October, my play, Pablo's Kisses, was in rehearsals and performed. And one day I was standing in front of my fireplace. I realized no matter how many words I could throw at the wood in the fireplace, they would never kindle. I had to go beyond words. So I looked at this specific play, and I looked at that scene, and I adapted that scene in terms of everything, visceral, the sound-wise, everything. And it set the whole play alive, and it was wonderful. Take something from, 1606 or whenever, and bring it to, 2019, worked great. And I just wondered, especially Jesse, how you went about harnessing the full visceral impact of that scene. I mean, inside our heads, we have thoughts that are sort of responding to the impact of these excitations that come from us in the theater, and in terms of the sound and the visual all combining, and we dread and we anticipate, and this taps the dramatic irony of the audience, knowing that she's really dead and the victim doesn't, etc. Now I'll shut up and listen.
Thanks, Paul.
Oh, what a great question. Let me try to answer it. I'm not sure I can. I mean, other than I really wanted to embrace. I mean, I'm asking, part of my challenge in answering questions about this play goes to some other questions about what's it like to revisit something from 15 years ago, and in my case, from 15 and 19 years ago, because so I have a lot of different stabs, if you will, at this play, and I haven't thought about it much except in the last months. You know, in terms of what I wanted to achieve in that scene in the theater and what we tried to recapture in the Zoom was a sense of, just as you described it, so it sounds like hopefully we were successful. I wanted as much theatricality as possible. This to me was a play that's just desperately in love with all things theatrical. And so I wanted, what's that word from Wagner, Gesamtkunstwerk? I wanted total theater, and I wanted opera and mass and veils and blood and grand guignol, and I wanted it to be all rooted in truth. And I remember even in our abbreviated rehearsal processes, both 15 years ago and in this last week, that we made sure, the actors and myself working together, that even though there's a great extremity that's going on, that all the behavior came from true passions and true storylines, and that the plot that Vindice and Hippolito are enacting at the end of our Act One, which I think is what you're asking about with the dress form and the skull, and the kill of the Duke, is the culmination of 9 years. 9 years of plotting and clawing their way up. You know, Hippolito, in my imagination, is clawing his way back up the ladder at court and getting close to Lasurioso and close to the royal family where their father once was. And Vindice has been stewing for almost a decade. So the passion and the thrill and the dangerous joy that those two boys, really, those two brothers, feel when they get to finally enact their vengeance is fiery and theatrical. Can someone help me answer that better, or ask?
I thought that answered it great, Jesse. Thought you nailed it.
Okay. There's one other thing about 15 years ago. I will say just one little thing that in terms of the adaptation that people might be interested in. When I was talking about Lucretia, I thought I was so forward thinking and progressive 15 years ago when I added the character back into the Revengers tragedy, but I wasn't. I didn't give her a single line in 2005. And then so one thing I did do for our reading in 2020 is I realized that, and I said, what do you mean? I've got a character named Lucretia. I added her to the play and she doesn't get to speak. And I thought that was powerful back in 2005 because, she's a victim. She doesn't get to speak. She's a voiceless woman in this misogynistic world. Well, so this time I corrected what I think was my mistake of 15 years ago. And I found some great lines that Saudia Davis delivered through gore from Shakespeare's poem, Rape of Lucrece. And so she has some lines now.
Great. Let me ask, I've got a question from Susan Saltrick here, which I think is going to be an interesting one to hear what the actors have to say. And it's, what is it like to be acting by yourself on a Zoom screen? Where do you get your energy, if not from live interaction with your fellow actors and the audience? Russell, the one person we haven't heard from yet, can you take this one?
I was gonna jump to that one anyway. I had this sort of out-of-body experience while I was backstage in my guest room and running around my house like I'm in a play right now while I'm also like working. It was like very it was kind of an incredible experience actually, and felt very similar to being in an actual production. But I thought one of the things that was sort of remarkable about this reading was that it really felt like the bones of the play that we had rehearsed 15 years ago were still really there. Even like, being a character who dies very early and then comes back as a different small character. Even from the outside, watching these people who I watched 15 years ago play these roles, especially Matt, with all of that you had on your shoulders, I was like, we got this still. It was kind of amazing. And that prologue felt very similar to what it was like to perform that play, even though it was a different version of it. the bones of that prologue were pretty much identical to with the music and the movement and what have you, minus my gold jock strap. So.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, I actually mentioned in a private chat to Russell one of these exact same things. I was like, his positioning of his face and capturing his angles on the Zoom, I thought were just so perfect and spot on for how his character was. And I think everyone did a really good job of, positioning themselves on the camera to be quite large, statuesque, menacing, really mirroring the actions and the internal actions and feelings and emotion of each of the characters. I thought that was represented really well by everyone's kind of characterization, if you will, visually.
I'm finding this conversation really gratifying in terms of this question, because I said to my wife afterwards, one of the things that I found so challenging about this reading was that in a theatrical performance, if you're giving a soliloquy or you're in a scene, there's a sense, an emotional sense and a physical sense of how it is landing on the audience. And the real challenge for me the other night was right from the drop at the beginning of the play was having no idea how the language was affecting the audience and using that affect to my own sort of benefit in performance. And it's gratifying to hear that it seems like the play sort of jumped off the screen, and that makes me frankly very happy. And I've found myself wondering whether this is sort of a cold medium or a hot medium, if that makes any sense. And I had convinced myself, probably through self-flagellation, that it was a cold medium, but I'm starting to at least maybe think it's possibly not, and so that feels like a positive thing.
I thought it was. Look, as well as I'm an actor, I'm a theater lover. So I was
me too.
Watching, I had plenty of time to sit back and watch and observe, and feel like an audience member. And actually, the what you established for the asides with coming in very close to the camera, to kind of separate that from, speaking with the audience, I thought was very effective. It worked for me just watching and seeing it. And, it just felt extremely theatrical for me watching. And I was very engaged. I loved it.
It also brought back so many amazing memories of the original production.
Oh God, didn't it though?
Being backstage when you would break the Duke's arm and the entire audience every night would just scream. And it was just like this amazing, like we were doing a theater piece that people were screaming at, and watching you do it on Zoom. I remember seeing Paul watching it and I was watching it too. And we were just both laughing because it was just like, this is just wonderful.
I really missed the opportunity to splash people in the front row with blood. Right. I do have to say that.
Well, I agree with everything you're saying. I just want to jump in and say that, I think the play did come through really powerfully, and all of the performances were wonderful. And we're going to keep experimenting with this form, but this is not a replacement for being in a room with people and creating together. There is
it's a different form, I would think.
There's no replacement for live theater, and I can't wait to get back in rehearsal rooms with all of you and theaters with all of our audiences. And whatever comes of Zoom and internet and online, streaming theater, great. But I still, I'm definitely a theater lover and a theater maker. And for me, the magic happens and ultimately happens around the campfire that we all share with the, live theater.
So when is the revival production of the Revengers Tragedy going to happen?
Good question. Let's do it.
So we have, I believe, time for one more question, and we have one more from Susan, and she actually has her hand raised, so we'll hear from her now. Susan, I'm about to give you permission to speak, and then if you could ask your question, that'd be great. The technology check.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hello.
Wonderful. So I actually saw the original production 15 years ago when it would be.
Oh my God, that's so cool.
Yeah, I've been bothering Jesse about it every time I see him.
Never a bother. Hi, Susan.
Hello, Jesse. I was thrilled to see this Zoom reading, and one thing that I noticed without the distractions of the rather overwhelming original staging, and I was in the front row, so that did include the blood splashing and all of that.
Yes.
I was able to concentrate much more intensely both on the actual words, the actual text, and on the facial expressions of the actors. Matt, especially with your 3 different disguises and what you were able to do with really just, I guess, a black cap and some yellow sunglasses. And the rest of it was really facial expression and vocal changes. Mm-hmm. So my question is that something that the cast focuses on particularly for a Zoom performance, like Jason said he was actually sitting down, or is it just that in the excitement of live theater and of course the different angles that you're sitting in and seeing the performance, we don't get to see it as much? Is this a conscious choice, or did I just miss it because of like the splashing blood the first time around?
Good question.
That's a very good question.
Yeah. One of the original cast has to grab it.
I mean, I'm happy to because of the 3 disguises, but I don't want to dominate the conversation. So if anyone wants to, please join in. I will say that one of the things I found, I think, how do I answer this? The answer is yes. If you see it live and you're able to focus that intensely on a person this closely, you will see immense changes. I think that, how do I answer this? Those 3 characters are 3 different people. Part of what Vindice is good at is the theatrical performance, like Richard III. He's sort of acting in every scene. And that goes back to the Burbage conversation, Tanya, that we're going to have another time. I also think that 15 years between performances is a lot of time for actors to change and mature and learn and experience text in a different way. And I think the actor that I was 15 years ago is very different than the actor that I am now, and hopefully very different from the actor that I will be in 15 years. And I think that I would approach this play in a very different way now than I approached it 15 years ago with 2.5 weeks to rehearse. And that's not to say that we shortchanged it 15 years ago, because I think we gave it a hell of a production and really knocked it out in the way that we were trying to do that. But I do think that there's an added depth to the play that frankly I missed 15 years ago. And I'd be very interested in re-exploring in a more preparatory, kind of cerebral way that would allow for the theatrical flair that Jesse has brought to this adaptation to flourish even more. And so the difference between Vindice at the beginning of the play and Piatto, and then the second version of Vindice, the sort of cap version of Vindice, would feel deeper and richer. My hope Monday was that those people would feel a little richer, and that having the box and the close-up would assist that process. But my intention, if we ever did this play live again, or just read it live again, would be that the differentiation between those people would be very, very clear, and that Vindice's performative abilities, his sort of chameleon-esque rage, would come out very clearly in a live situation, and you wouldn't need to be 10 inches from my face to understand that. I hope that's some semi-articulate answer to that question.
Absolutely. Does anybody else want to jump in before?
Yeah, please. I'm sorry to dominate.
That's all right. I think that's a really good response, Matt. I think there is something about the size of the play and what we did 15 years ago, and then the size of this version just taught us a whole new lesson about the play. And for us to then be able to take it again would be kind of marvelous to say, how do we do that in amongst the size, and so that the things, what you're seeing, Susan, really lands to everybody in the room, as well as the spectacle. That would be wonderful to do.
I agree, and I would just add just two thoughts. I mean, I think that everything you both said is true, and I would love to re-explore it. And one of the things I was surprised by, and I think part of this is how memory works. We remember the spectacle of the Revengers tragedy, and I when I was thinking about the play over the last, every time it came up, I thought, I don't want to do a reading of the Revengers tragedy. The text isn't that good. It was the spectacle. But actually, I think we did capture those moments more than we remember, because the spectacle was so memorable. And do you know what I mean? The breaking of the bone or the flashy blood, that stuff was very memorable. But the subtleties were there. I mean, Matt, I can vividly remember when you say that beautiful line to Petronia's character, Graciana, I think Matt's happiest when he forgets himself, or the silkworm speech, or Paul, or Jason, your wonderful work on that Spurio speech, or any of you. So I do think that we mined those subtleties pretty well back in 2005, but I would love to get back in a rehearsal room and do it again and find all those dimensions of characters within the theatricality.
I do want to say that Russell mentioned the remembering of the play. To everyone who's listening, we had a really fun time doing this play. It was incredibly difficult, but incredibly fun. It was in challenging circumstances, and the dressing rooms were tiny, and it was sweaty and hot, but we really had a good time. And every day there were moments when I sort of went through the looking glass and remembered extraordinary times of performing the play. And the most vivid one, I have to say, Jason, was during your monologue, because your fantastic monologue preceded a very difficult scene for me, the first entrance of Piatto. And I remember sitting as Piatto backstage and listening to you just crush that monologue every night and thinking, God, I got to go out there and I got to really be good tonight. And it was really so great to just hear you do it again. And I just wanted to say that in front of other people and give you that compliment, because it was awesome.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
You're welcome.
I think that this is a good place to call it. It's great to have you all in at least this kind of a room, and to have this connection, and to have had the opportunity to do this again. Thank you all for coming to be part of this discussion. Thank you, Russell, Matt, Paul, Naomi, Jason, Anthony.
Thank you.
That was the order on my screen. Special thank you to Tanya for joining us for this, and of course Jesse, and of course special thank you to you, the audience. We're shouting into a void without y'all. You're just as much a part of this. Thank you all for coming and for being so enthusiastic. Check out Red Bull Theater is doing a whole lot more things. I'm not even going to say what's next because I've lost track. It's basically all nonstop. So look out for what we got next. It's all great and it's all very exciting. We are really committed to continuing to foment means of connection in this time. Everything we are offering for this season is free. If you wish to support this work, you can make a donation at redbulltheater.com, and it would be much appreciated. But it is also just much appreciated to have you all here and to do this all together. Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.